The autumn air around Thornhill Plantation carried a sense of quiet decay, the kind that crept in slowly and announced itself only through absence. Constance Whitmore stood alone by the tall window of her bedroom, watching the final carriage vanish down the oak-lined drive. Another visit concluded, another disappointment sealed. Her household remained unchanged, 4 grown daughters, 4 empty futures, and no male heir to anchor the family name. In the rigid world of 1847, this absence mattered more than wealth, refinement, or history. Without a grandson, Thornhill would not remain hers. Her late husband's brother, Edmund Whitmore, had already made his intentions painfully clear. The law favored him, society favored him, and time favored no one. Constance felt the weight of gossip pressing in from all sides, whispered judgments sharpening with every passing season. Respectability was fragile, and Thornhill stood balanced on its edge. Margaret, the eldest, carried the heaviest burden. At 28, she had outlived society's patience. 3 broken engagements clung to her reputation like stains that refused to fade. Elizabeth followed close behind, brilliant but sharp, her wit cutting too deeply for polite men who preferred obedience over intelligence. Caroline drifted through life like a shadow, present in body but absent in spirit, her melancholy unsettling to suitors who wanted cheer, not depth. Abigail, the youngest, remained painfully shy, her gentleness mistaken for weakness in a world that rewarded boldness. Constance had tried everything: lavish balls, discreet introductions, even lowering expectations she once considered non-negotiable. Nothing worked. Each failed season tightened the noose. Edmund's lawyers were already preparing documents, and Constance knew the truth she could not voice aloud. If she did nothing, everything Thomas had built would belong to a man she despised. The idea did not arrive suddenly. It crept into her thoughts during sleepless nights and lingered long after she tried to banish it. At first, she dismissed it as monstrous, unthinkable. Then she examined it again, stripped of emotion, viewed through the cold lens of necessity. Society demanded heirs, not husbands. Bloodlines mattered more than virtue. If her daughters could not secure children through marriage, then children would have to come another way. The solution horrified her precisely because it worked. A single man, completely controlled, could solve what 4 failed courtships could not. Constance understood the risk, the moral cost, the irreversible nature of such a decision. Yet desperation has a way of muting conscience. On a quiet Tuesday evening, alone with a glass of brandy in Thomas's old study, she stopped pretending she would not do it. She rationalized with precision. Society accepted convenient lies as long as appearances were maintained. She could claim the children as her own, a late miracle of motherhood, or she could arrange quiet marriages with distant men willing to trade their names for financial security. The details were manageable. What mattered was speed. A healthy child born within the year would secure Thornhill and block Edmund's claim permanently. The plan required secrecy, loyalty, and someone capable of executing it without hesitation. Constance rang for Mrs. Hartwell, her longtime house manager. The woman had served the family for decades and understood discretion better than anyone alive. When Constance explained what she needed, Mrs. Hartwell listened without interruption, her face carefully neutral. Only her trembling hands betrayed her reaction. She agreed to make inquiries in Charleston, to find a man who fit Constance's requirements exactly. The purchase was finalized on a fog-heavy morning near the Ashley River. Constance stayed away. Visibility meant danger. Mrs. Hartwell returned with a young man called Samuel, a name assigned, not chosen. He was tall, strong, and guarded in a way that spoke of long survival. Sold multiple times, he had learned to reveal nothing that could be used against him. What no one suspected was that Samuel could read. He had taught himself in secret, understanding that knowledge was the only form of ownership denied to masters. At Thornhill, he was not sent to the quarters. Instead, he was placed in a small cabin far from view. Constance met him at dusk, her face veiled, her voice unsteady. For the first time, the idea became real. She was no longer planning, she was acting. She spoke carefully, laying out the arrangement as if discussing business. Samuel would live separately. He would be fed well, clothed properly, spared the worst of plantation labor. In return, he would perform one task only. Once each daughter conceived, his role would end. She promised to sell him north afterward, to an owner known for relative kindness. It was the closest thing to mercy she could offer without breaking the law. Samuel listened in silence. Inside, he calculated risks and possibilities. This was coercion, yes, but also an opening. Survival depended on reading power correctly. When Constance finished, she waited. Samuel raised his eyes, breaking etiquette deliberately, and asked a question she had hoped to avoid. Did her daughters know? Did they truly agree? Constance gave him a softened version of the truth. Agreement, she said, though the word felt heavy. Margaret came first. She entered the cabin with resolve etched into every movement, her pride barely masking desperation. She spoke plainly, refusing to pretend. She named the wrongness of what was happening without absolving herself of participation. Samuel listened, surprised by her honesty. He chose not to soften reality. He named it as it was: ownership, necessity, exploitation. Margaret did not flinch. She accepted the truth because denial offered no refuge. What followed was not gentle, but it was human. There was no illusion of romance, only shared acknowledgement of circumstance. When she left before dawn, she promised something unusual. She would remember that he was a person, not property. That promise lingered long after the door closed. Elizabeth arrived in fury. Her anger filled the cabin before she spoke, spilling out in accusations and bitterness. She hated her mother, hated herself, hated the system that had reduced her to this choice. Samuel let her rage burn itself out. When he finally spoke, he held up a mirror she did not expect. She saw herself reflected not as superior but as constrained, traded for her body's function just as he was. The realization shattered something inside her. Tears replaced rage. What happened between them carried more resistance, more grief, but also a strange balance. Elizabeth returned later, not out of obligation, but to ask how he endured being owned. His answer stayed with her. You hold on to the parts they can't touch. Caroline came next, already Alf, gone. She moved as if detached from herself, resigned to whatever was expected. Samuel stopped her. He refused to treat her absence as consent. He spoke to her, insisted she was still present, still mattered. Slowly, painfully, she began to respond. Their time together became less about conception and more about recovery. He recognized the signs of dependence in her, helped her reduce the medicine dulling her mind. She spoke of emptiness, of watching life from behind glass. Samuel shared his own strategies for survival, remembering, hoping, resisting erasure. When she eventually conceived, it felt secondary to the larger change. Caroline was living again. Abigail arrived last, trembling. She could not cross the threshold at first. Samuel did not force her. He spoke gently, told her stories of ordinary beauty, things untouched by cruelty. Over time, her fear eased. She stepped inside, sat, listened, spoke. She was not weak, he realized, only sensitive in a world that punished sensitivity. When intimacy came, it was careful, restrained, almost protective. Afterward, she slept beside him, something no one else had done. For one night, she felt safe. But safety at Thornhill was temporary, and unseen eyes were already beginning to notice what should have remained hidden. The first sign of danger came quietly. A stable hand named Joseph noticed patterns that did not belong on a well-run plantation. The isolated cabin, the late-night movement, the master's daughter's walking path. They had never walked before. Joseph understood the rules of survival better than most. Slaves did not interfere in the affairs of white families. But this situation was different. If the truth surfaced on its own, Samuel would not survive it. Punishment would be swift and brutal. Joseph wrestled with the choice for days before approaching Samuel discreetly near the well. He spoke in low tones, warning him that eyes were watching and rumors forming. Samuel felt a cold clarity settle over him. He had grown careless, distracted by the fragile sense of humanity developing between himself and the sisters. Joseph's warning forced him back into reality. Thornhill was not a sanctuary, it was a trap waiting to close. Before Samuel could act on that warning, Edmund Whitmore arrived unannounced. He claimed it was a family visit, but everyone knew the truth. He was inspecting his future property. Edmund was sharp-eyed, methodical, and deeply cruel beneath his polished manners. He noticed immediately that Constance did not behave like a woman facing imminent ruin. She was too composed, too confident. Suspicion took root. Over the next day, Edmund observed routines, questioned servants, and pieced together fragments. The secluded cabin, the altered behavior of the daughters, the tension beneath polite conversation. When the picture finally formed, Edmund did not react with outrage. He reacted with calculation. What he had uncovered was not just scandal, it was leverage. Br Edmund Confron. Ted Constance in her study with surgical precision. He named her actions plainly, stripping away euphemism. Buying a slave for breeding, using him to produce heirs. The exposure alone would destroy her. Worse, the children would never inherit legally if the truth emerged. Constance felt fear unlike anything she had known. Edmund then offered his solution. She would sign Thornhill over to him quietly. He would bury the scandal. Her daughters would receive modest support. The slave, however, would have to disappear permanently. The casual way Edmund spoke of killing Samuel made something inside Constance fracture. She had crossed moral lines, but she had not intended death. She suddenly understood how far she had fallen. Before Constance could respond, Elizabeth burst into the room. She had been listening. She refused Edmund's offer outright. Edmund dismissed her, confident in his authority, until Elizabeth revealed what he had not anticipated. The pregnancies were real. Margaret's child was confirmed, so was hers. Caroline and Abigail likely followed. Edmund's rage surfaced instantly. He called the children illegitimate, unworthy. Elizabeth countered calmly. The law followed the mother. Society preferred comfortable lies to ugly truths. The fathers would be unnamed white men. Scandal, yes. Disinheritance, no. Edmund understood immediately. She was right. The system would protect the illusion. But Edmund had one final objection: Samuel. As long as he lived, the truth remained dangerous. That was when Elizabeth revealed her final move. Samuel would leave that night, not sold, not silenced, freed. Constance recoiled at the speed of it, but Elizabeth did not waver. Edmund laughed, calling it impossible. Margaret stepped forward then, composed and cold. If Edmund refused, they would confess everything publicly. Church, community, complete destruction of the Whitmore name. Thornhill would be worthless to him. It was a threat built on mutual ruin. Edmund recognized it immediately. For the first time, the power dynamic shifted. They negotiated in bitter silence. Edmund would arrange passage north for Samuel. Documents would be forged, money exchanged. In return, the sisters would maintain the lie forever. Edmund would appear magnanimous. No one would speak of the truth again. It was an agreement that satisfied no one, which made it workable. That night, all four sisters went to the cabin together. Samuel sensed the change instantly. When they explained the plan, he did not accept it easily. Trusting Edmund meant trusting a man who wanted him dead hours earlier. But the alternative was worse. Staying meant execution or sale. Freedom, even fragile, was still freedom. Samuel asked about the children. Abigail answered through tears. They would never know him. They would be raised inside the system that enslaved him. The cruelty of that truth cut deeper than any threat. Margaret handed him a pouch of jewelry converted into cash, enough to begin again. Blue. D-money, perhaps, but also possibility. Samuel asked for time to say goodbye. The sisters agreed. Quiet farewells followed. Joseph clasped his hand. An elderly woman pressed a small carved bird into his palm, a reminder that flight was possible, even if rare. At dawn, Edmund arrived with a closed carriage and the papers. The journey to Charleston passed in silence. At the docks, Samuel boarded the ship without looking back until the last moment. As Thornhill disappeared from view, he held the wooden bird tightly. He promised himself that this escape would matter, that he would turn survival into purpose. Behind him, the sisters watched the sun rise over a future built on secrecy. Thornhill was secure, but none of them felt victorious. The months that followed unfolded in uneasy quiet. Thornhill appeared stable on the surface, but beneath that calm lay carefully managed deception. Constance allowed rumors to spread in controlled doses, whispering of discreet affairs and unnamed gentlemen who had passed briefly through town. Society responded as expected. The Whitmore daughters became objects of scandal, but not exile. Their story fit a narrative people preferred to believe. Edmund played his role flawlessly, presenting himself as a protective uncle standing by disgraced but respectable family members. Privately, resentment burned. He had been outmaneuvered by women he had dismissed as weak. The law would not rescue him now. Thornhill remained beyond his grasp. The children reborn in the spring, healthy, white in the eyes of the law. Margaret's son carried her late husband's name, a deliberate act of reclamation. Elizabeth's child arrived loud and strong, mirroring her fierce temperament. Caroline named her daughter Hope, a word she had once believed meaningless. Abigail's son bore Samuel's name, a quiet defiance that only her sisters understood. The household adjusted around the infants, joy braided tightly with unspoken grief. Each child represented survival, but also sacrifice. They secured Thornhill, but sealed the truth away forever. As years passed, each sister carried the weight differently. Margaret hardened, becoming efficient and distant, mastering the plantation with a discipline forged from necessity. Elizabeth grew sharper still, her anger redirected into social maneuvering and guarded intellect. Caroline devoted herself entirely to her daughter, determined that Hope would never feel unseen. Abigail remained gentle, but a shadow followed her always. She saw Samuel in her son's eyes, in his quiet observation of the world. It was a private grief she never shared aloud. Their mother aged quickly. Constance understood that survival had cost her something irreplaceable. Thornhill stood, but innocence did not. Then the world changed. War came as it always had to. The South fractured. Slavery collapsed under the weight of its own violence. Thornhill endured, diminished but intact. The enslaved people were freed. Some stayed, others left. Without looking back. Joseph left with quiet pride. Ruth left with tears and hope tangled together. The sisters watched history dismantle the system that had shaped every terrible choice they had made. Freedom arrived too late to erase guilt, but not too late to matter. They sometimes wondered about Samuel, whether he had survived, whether he had found peace. They would never know. He had vanished into the vastness of freedom, leaving behind children who would never learn his name or his story. But far from Thornhill, in a northern city filled with noise and movement, a man called Samuel Freeman built a life. He worked in a print shop, setting words that argued for justice. He married. He had children who knew who their father was and what he had endured. He used the money given to him not for comfort alone, but to help others escape bondage. Samuel became part of the Underground Railroad. He guided strangers toward freedom, knowing each successful escape gave meaning to his own. Sometimes, late at night, he thought of the 4 children in the South. He wondered what kind of people they would become. He accepted that freedom often demanded unbearable loss, but he refused to let that loss be empty. The story of Thornhill Plantation never entered official history. It lived instead in silences, in choices, in the lives shaped by secrets. There were no heroes. Only people surviving within a brutal system, making impossible decisions with limited options. Constance saved her legacy by surrendering her morality. The sisters secured their futures by participating in their own exploitation. Samuel gained freedom by leaving his blood behind in chains of ignorance. The children grew up privileged, untouched by the truth that created them. They benefited from the same system that had enslaved their father. Whether that ignorance was mercy or cruelty remained unanswered. Thornhill stood, beautiful and quiet, its foundations built on sacrifice few would ever name. This was not a story of victory. It was a story of survival, of people choosing the least unbearable path in a world that offered no good one.